All right, everyone, get ready because today we are taking a deep dive into Islamic teachings and practices.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting.
And the source material we have, oh boy, is it rich.
I know.
It's richer than baklava, like drenched in honey.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Right. We are working with excerpts from the Quran,
Of course.
specifically from Al-Baqarah, which is the second chapter, and also some really choice selections from Sahih Bukhari.
That's one of the most important.
Exactly. It's a collection of sayings and like stories, all about the Prophet Muhammad.
Basically, think of it as like getting a backstage pass to understand, one of the world's major religions and how these texts kind of shape the belief in everyday life for millions of people.
I love that. A backstage pass, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to go deeper than just the surface level.
Right.
We're really on the hunt for those little details.
Exactly, the hidden gems.
Yeah, the hidden gems, even maybe some like head-scratching moments.
Yeah.
That'll really make these texts pop.
Sure.
You ready to get your hands a little dusty?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
All right, let's do it.
We're going deep.
We are going deep. No skimming here.
No.
So let's kick things off with the Quran, specifically Al-Baqarah. Right off the bat, it lays down like a core belief.
Right.
This idea of believing in the unseen.
The unseen.
Having faith in Allah, even in the things that, you can't physically see or prove.
Right. So it's interesting, right? This idea of faith in the unseen, it's really tied to this sense of trust and submission to the will of Allah. And it's reflected in how the text emphasizes prayer, charity, and knowing right from wrong. And these are all seen as like acts of devotion, acts of obedience.
Yeah, it's not just a passive belief, though. The text, it gets pretty direct about how this belief should like show up in how you live your life.
Right, exactly.
Your everyday life.
Spot on.
Right.
And verse 2.13, for example, it kind of throws down a challenge, to those outside of the faith.
Yeah.
It asks, shall we believe as the fools believe?
Whoa.
Now that might sound a little harsh to our modern ears.
Yeah, a little bit.
But remember, this was a very different time and place.
Right.
And so I think what's really important here is this verse. What it does is it draws a line in the sand.
Right.
Between those who believe and those who don't.
Believers and non-believers.
And it does so with a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
In the truth of Islamic beliefs.
It really makes you think about how different cultures, through time and place, approach faith.
Sure.
And how those approaches evolve over time.
Right.
Really fascinating. So, okay, let's put the Quran aside for a second.
Okay.
And pick up Sahih Bukhari for a little bit.
Let's do it.
This collection is just like bursting with really intricate descriptions of prayer rituals.
Oh, it is remarkable how detailed it gets.
Yeah.
You're not just learning like the basic moves, you're getting specific direction on hand placement, foot placement, like the whole 9 yards.
Oh, the whole 9 yards? Wow.
Yeah, so imagine like having a step-by-step guide to prayer straight for the time of the Prophet.
It's like IKEA instructions for prayer.
Yes, exactly.
But there's also this intriguing little bit about the Prophet's ablution practices.
Right.
Specifically, like washing with a really limited amount of water.
Limited water.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. So in Book 1, Hadith 194, we see the Prophet performing ablution, and he's using a surprisingly small amount of water.
Wow.
Now, for folks who aren't super familiar with Islamic practices, ablution is that ritual washing before prayer.
Right.
And it's a really big deal. It's very important.
Huge.
So what this hadith shows us is that even when water was scarce, maintaining ritual purity was still a top priority.
It really shows you the level of commitment and adaptability.
Yes, absolutely.
And then there's these, let's call them unexpected details. Like, there are rules about spitting during prayer.
You're right. Right.
Hadith 1.404.
It clearly states that spitting in front or to your right during prayer, that's a no-no.
Got it.
But to the left or under your foot, go for it.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Right. It might seem like a trivial thing.
Yeah.
But it really emphasizes the sanctity and the respect that surrounds the act of prayer.
I mean, even the smallest actions have this, like, deeper significance.
Absolutely.
And speaking of unexpected, did you know it's permissible to pray on a donkey?
As long as you're facing the right direction.
Of course, of course.
So this is actually laid out in Hadith 2.198.
Okay.
And it really just shows that the commitment to prayer can transcend any physical limitations.
Wow.
Or, any unusual circumstance.
You're talking devotion on the go.
Exactly.
It really paints this picture of, like, faith being woven into just like the fabric of everyday life.
Right into everyday life.
So now switching gears a little bit to another cornerstone of Islam, fasting, with a special focus on Ramadan. But before we kind of jump in, maybe you could give us a little bit of a primer on what Ramadan is all about.
Sure. So Ramadan is the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, and it's observed by Muslims worldwide.
All right.
As a month of fasting, prayer, reflection, and community.
I think a whole month, right?
For a whole month.
So Muslims abstain from food and drink from dawn till dusk.
Yes.
It's a time for spiritual cleansing, for reconnecting with Allah and strengthening your faith.
It's like a spiritual reset.
Yeah, it's more than just giving up your snacks. It's the whole, spiritual reset.
Exactly.
And Sahih Bukhari gives us some really interesting insights into how fasting practices actually evolved over time.
It does.
It talks about this concept of Ashura,
right,
which was a day of fasting observed by pre-Islamic Arabs and even early Muslims.
Yeah, so you're right. Hadith 3.117 tells us that Prophet Muhammad initially encouraged fasting on Ashura, which commemorates the day when Moses and the Israelites were saved from Pharaoh. So later, when Ramadan became the main month of fasting, observing Ashura became optional.
Interesting.
It just goes to show that religious practices, they're not set in stone.
Right.
They evolve, they adapt to different situations.
It's a reminder that traditions have a history and a context.
They do, yes.
Fascinating.
It's very fascinating, exactly. And, when we look at Hadith 3.167, we see another fascinating example of this adaptability. It's a hot day, people are fasting, and the Prophet comes across this man being shaded by others.
Okay.
And instead of praising this, strict adherence to the rules of the fast, the Prophet says, it is not righteousness to fast on a journey.
Wow.
Really highlighting compassion and practicality over rigid rules.
Right.
Especially in those really difficult situations.
Yeah, it's almost like the spirit of the law trumps the letter of the law, right, in this case.
Exactly.
It really makes you think about how those principles could apply to, modern life and how Muslims today kind of navigate those gray areas.
That is a really great question, and one that I'm sure sparks a lot of, debate and discussion within the Muslim community.
Oh, I bet.
But that's what makes studying these texts so fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? They're not just historical documents. They're really living sources of guidance that people are, grappling with and applying to their lives in all sorts of different ways.
It's a living tradition. Yeah, I like that.
It is.
And Sahih Bukhari just keeps throwing those curveballs.
Yeah.
Like this detail about fasting on behalf of a deceased person.
Oh, yeah.
Which we see in Hadith 3.174. It really speaks to this deep sense of family.
It does.
And caring for loved ones, even after death.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful expression of that.
Yeah.
Of love and duty.
And speaking of those unexpected details, Hadith 3.15 casually mentions that the Prophet allowed kissing his wife while fasting.
Yes.
Which, at first glance might seem like a contradiction, but it actually highlights this really nuanced understanding of the boundaries of the fast.
Yeah.
It's not just about physical restrictions.
Right. The focus is really on that spiritual devotion.
Yeah, it's about the intention behind the practice, right?
Yeah.
Not just following rules blindly.
Exactly.
It's like the difference between going through the motions versus truly embodying the spirit of the fast.
That's a great way to put it.
And that brings us to another really significant practice.
Yes.
The Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Yes. A journey that is both deeply personal and communal. A physical and spiritual act of submission to Allah.
And Sahih Bukhari is this super detailed traveler's guide to the Hajj.
It is. It really is.
It walks us through all those ancient rituals with just incredible detail.
Yeah.
For example, the concept of ihram, which is the sacred state that pilgrims enter into.
Right.
The text spells out exactly when to enter and exit that state.
So Hadith 2.599 lays out those guidelines really clearly. And it also mentions things like, the prohibition against cutting trees or hunting in the sacred areas around Mecca, which we see in Hadith 2.657. And so these rules really highlight the sanctity of the pilgrimage and the importance of respecting, the environment.
It's like spiritual practice and environmental awareness all in one.
Exactly.
And the level of detail is it's astounding.
It really is.
There's even instructions for what to do if a pilgrim gets their period.
Yes.
Which is not something you necessarily think about ahead of time.
Right. So Hadiths 2.815 and 3.15, they address this directly.
Okay.
They outline alternative rituals,
Okay.
and they make it really clear that women can still fully participate in the Hajj, even with the natural, occurrences of menstruation.
Right.
It's really a testament to the inclusivity of Islamic practices.
It's like the Hajj is designed to be accessible to everyone, regardless of their circumstance.
Absolutely. That's a great observation.
So this brings us to another core aspect of Islamic teachings. Yes.
These ideas of charity and the prohibition of usury, which is also known as riba.
Right.
And these concepts are really central to Islamic economic principles.
They are.
So we know that charity, or zakat, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. But usury is like a hard no.
It is. It's seen as exploitative, unjust.
Right. Exactly.
And if we go back to the Quran, verse 2.262 of Al-Baqarah paints this really beautiful picture of what true charity should look like.
I like that.
It emphasizes giving for the sake of Allah without expecting anything in return.
Right.
And also, without causing any harm or humiliation to the recipient.
Yeah, it's that pure intention that really matters.
It is. And Sahih Bukhari backs this up.
Right.
With real-life examples. So Hadith 3.391, for instance, it gets into the nitty-gritty of forbidden types of usury.
Okay.
Like, for example, selling dates on the tree.
Oh, okay.
For harvested dates. So that's considered usury because it involves uncertainty and the potential for exploitation.
Wow, it's interesting how specific they get with these examples.
It is. It's like they wanted to leave no room for ambiguity.
Right. It really shows this concern for fairness and transparency in, financial dealings.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this amazing story about Abu Talha, who gives away his most prized possession,
Okay.
his garden, as an act of charity. And we find that in Hadith 3299.
Wow, that's such a powerful story.
It is. It's powerful.
It shows that true generosity isn't just about giving what's convenient. It's about giving sacrificially.
It's about giving from the heart.
From the heart.
It really sets a high bar for charitable giving.
It does. So speaking of relationships, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about marriage and divorce from an Islamic perspective.
Yeah.
Marriage is considered a sacred bond, right?
It is, absolutely. And Sahih Bukhari, as you might expect, provides a lot of insights into the specific rules and practices surrounding marriage in early Islam.
For instance, did you know that a man can't be married to a woman and her aunt at the same time?
That's right. Hadith 8.3412 lays down that law. And it really makes you think about, the complexities of kinship.
Right.
And how those relationships were navigated within the context of marriage
Yeah,
back then.
definitely. And what about divorce? How is that approached in Islam?
Well, it's definitely considered a last resort.
Okay.
But Islam recognizes that sometimes it's necessary.
Right.
And when it does happen, there are clear guidelines to ensure fairness and protect the rights of both parties.
Okay.
So Hadith 9.3485 details these rules,
Yeah.
including, waiting periods
Right.
and even the option of reconciliation.
So it's not just this quick split,
No, not at all.
There's a process
that.
that's designed to encourage, thoughtful consideration
Exactly.
and hopefully prevent hasty decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you've got this really intriguing anecdote
Okay.
in Hadith 8.3282 about Umar,
Okay.
who was a close companion of the Prophet.
Yes.
And he was considering marrying his son during the Hajj,
Okay.
but he was actually advised against it,
Oh.
which suggests that even during, these significant religious events,
Yeah,
practical considerations and social norms still held sway.
they did.
It's a reminder that faith isn't lived in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely.
It's always intertwined with the complexities of culture and human relationships.
It is. It's a great point. So
Yeah.
now, taking a step back, let's consider the life of Prophet Muhammad himself.
Okay.
Sahih Bukhari offers this treasure trove of stories and anecdotes that give us glimpses into his personality,
Yeah.
his teachings, and his leadership.
Yeah, these stories really humanize him.
They do.
Right. It makes him relatable, even to those who aren't super familiar with Islam.
Absolutely. Like, for instance, the story about the black person
Yeah.
who cleaned the mosque, which we find in Hadith 2.421.
So powerful.
It's incredibly powerful.
Yes.
So when the prophet learns of this person's death, he actually goes to their grave and offers the funeral prayer.
Wow.
Even though, this person was a black slave, someone who was often overlooked and marginalized in society.
Yeah. It's a really profound statement about social equality.
It is.
And the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their, social standing or background.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how that message resonates with Muslims today.
Right.
Especially in societies where racial and social inequalities still very much exist.
Absolutely. That's a really important question. And it's one that, contemporary Islamic scholars and activists continue to grapple with.
Right.
But it's clear that the Prophet's actions in this story really set a powerful precedent for challenging injustice and advocating for the marginalized.
Absolutely. And that message of equality, it's echoed in Hadith 1.664, where the Prophet instructs his followers to listen and obey your chief, even if he is an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin.
Right. So now that image might seem a little jarring to us today.
Yeah.
But remember, this was a society where physical appearance and ethnicity were often used to justify social hierarchies.
Right.
So this statement was incredibly radical for its time. By directly challenging those assumptions, it argued that leadership and authority should be based on piety and character, not superficial traits.
It's a message that I think is still very relevant today.
It is.
Even if the language maybe needs a little bit of updating.
Yeah, for sure.
It reminds us that true leadership, it transcends outward appearances.
It does.
It's about those inner qualities.
Exactly.
That integrity and compassion.
You're absolutely right. And this brings us to a topic that often, generates some controversy.
Oh.
The question of how Islam views warfare and the treatment of non-Muslims.
It's a sensitive subject.
It is.
But it's one that we can't really shy away from if we want to have an honest and comprehensive understanding of Islamic teachings.
You are absolutely right. It's important to acknowledge that the Quran and Hadith do contain verses and passages that, when read literally and out of context, can seem to endorse violence and discrimination.
Right.
But I think it's crucial to approach these texts with a critical eye and a willingness to consider, the historical context in which they were revealed.
So, for example, some people might point to Hadith 4.70.
Okay.
Which mentions that some people drank alcohol in the morning of the day of the Battle of Uhud and were martyred on the same day.
Right.
And they might use this to claim that Islam glorifies martyrdom or condones alcohol consumption.
Right, but if we look at the broader context of the Battle of Uhud, we see that it was a defensive battle.
Okay.
Fought against an enemy that had attacked the Muslim community.
Right.
And while the Hadith does mention alcohol, it's crucial to remember that alcohol is strictly forbidden in Islam.
Right.
So this Hadith isn't endorsing drinking. It's simply recounting a historical event within its specific context.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture, not just isolating individual verses or passages to fit a particular agenda.
Exactly.
It's about understanding, the nuance and the complexities of the text.
Precisely. And when it comes to the treatment of non-Muslims, it's important to remember that there's a wide spectrum of perspectives within Islamic thought.
Mm-hmm.
So while some interpretations might emphasize a more confrontational approach, others stress the importance of peaceful coexistence and dialogue.
Right. For instance, the story of the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah, as recounted in Hadith 4.273, it shows the Prophet Muhammad agreeing to terms that were seemingly unfavorable to him.
Right.
But in order to achieve a peaceful resolution with his adversaries.
Right. So that event really highlights the Prophet's pragmatism and his willingness to compromise for the sake of peace.
Right.
It shows that, the historical reality of Muslim-non-Muslim relations was often far more nuanced and complex than some, simplistic interpretations might suggest.
Yeah, it's about moving beyond those black and white narratives. Engaging with the full story, even when it's messy or uncomfortable.
Absolutely, and I think that engagement requires humility. A willingness to learn from different perspectives and a recognition that our own understanding might be incomplete.
Right.
It's about asking questions, seeking clarification, and being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
That reminds me of the Quran's emphasis on seeking knowledge.
Yes, verse 2.262 of Al-Baqarah, while focusing on charity, also highlights the pursuit of knowledge and understanding.
Okay.
It says that those who spend their wealth for the sake of Allah and follow not up their gifts with reminders of their generosity or with injury, For them, their reward is with their Lord.
It's about approaching knowledge not for personal gain, right, or to feel superior to others, but for the sake of deepening our understanding and acting with, wisdom and compassion.
Absolutely. And that quest for knowledge, it's a lifelong journey. It's a process of continuous learning, unlearning, and relearning. It's about approaching texts and traditions with curiosity and a critical eye, always striving to understand them, within their proper context, and to apply their teachings in a way that benefits, ourselves and the world around us.
It's about finding those timeless nuggets of wisdom that can help us navigate the complexities of our modern lives.
Exactly. And speaking of those little nuggets of wisdom, let's shift our attention to the details that Sahih Bukhari provides about, the Prophet Muhammad's personal habits and preferences.
Right.
These seemingly mundane details actually offer surprisingly profound insights into his character and the values he embodied.
Yeah, it is fascinating how those details, often overlooked, really illuminate the human side of the Prophet.
They do.
They make him relatable and give us practical examples of how he lived out his faith.
Right.
In everyday life.
So, for example, there's this intriguing detail in Hadith 1.799 that mentions how the Prophet, he preferred to sleep early and get up early.
Oh, okay.
It might seem like, a simple habit. But it speaks volumes about his discipline and his commitment to, making the most of his time for both spiritual and worldly pursuits.
Yeah, it's like he had this built-in productivity hack.
He did.
Centuries before anyone even thought of the word productivity.
Right, and it wasn't just about sleep.
Right.
Hadith 3.247 describes how the Prophet, while observing itikaf, which is a period of seclusion and devotion in the mosque, he would still allow his wife Aisha to wash his hair.
Oh, interesting.
So this really shows his attention to personal hygiene, even during, these intense spiritual practices.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in the midst of, religious observance, practical needs and personal relationships, those were still important.
They were.
And speaking of relationships,
yes,
there are so many hadiths that really showcase the Prophet's love and respect for his wives. For instance, Hadith 1.493 describes him praying while Aisha lay sleeping between him and the Qibla, the direction of prayer.
Yes.
So this seemingly small detail really reveals, I think, his tenderness and consideration towards her.
It does.
Ensuring her comfort even during his own acts of worship.
It's a really heartwarming glimpse into their personal bond.
It is.
It is.
And it's not just about, romantic relationships.
Right.
Hadith 4.729 really emphasizes the importance of family ties, stating that the son of the sister of some people belongs to them.
Right.
This statement, while seemingly straightforward, had really significant implications for a society where, tribal affiliations often took precedence.
Absolutely, over blood ties.
Right. So it's like he was expanding the definition of family, creating a more inclusive and interconnected community.
And all these examples of the Prophet's personal habits and his interactions really serve as a model for Muslims to emulate, right?
They do. It illustrates how faith isn't just about rituals and doctrines, but also about embodying certain values and principles in our everyday lives.
It's about putting faith into action. Translating belief into compassion and kindness in our interactions with others.
And that brings us to another really central theme in Islamic teachings. The emphasis on good character and moral conduct.
Absolutely. Sahih Bukhari is just filled with stories and sayings that highlight the importance of honesty, trustworthiness, justice, and kindness. For example, Hadith 3.502 recounts how the Prophet defended a man who was being, kind of rude while demanding his death.
Oh, wow.
He reminded his companions that, the creditor, that is the owner of a right, has the right to speak.
So even when someone is behaving badly, their rights must still be respected.
Yes, absolutely. It's about upholding fairness and due process, even when dealing with, difficult individuals.
And this commitment to justice is reinforced in Hadith 2.481.
Where the Prophet states, I give to a person while another is dearer to me for fear that he may be thrown in the hellfire.
Wow.
So this shows that he prioritized fairness and impartiality in distributing charity.
Right.
Even if it meant going against his personal preferences.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a reminder that our actions should be guided by, principles of justice and equity.
Exactly.
Not by personal biases or favoritism.
Yes, and then we have this beautifully evocative Hadith.
Okay.
2.462, which describes the journey of a soul after death.
Okay.
It states that when the funeral is ready, if the deceased is a righteous person, he says, take me ahead. And if he is not a righteous one, then he says, woe to it, me. Where are you taking it, me?
So vivid and, obviously metaphorical.
Sure.
It really underscores the importance of striving for righteousness in this life.
It does.
It's a reminder that our choices have lasting consequences.
They do, and these teachings about, character and morality are really tightly interwoven.
With the concept of taqwa, which is often translated as, God consciousness or piety.
Yeah, so it's about being aware of Allah in all aspects of your life.
Yes.
Your thoughts, your words, your actions.
Yes, it's about striving to live in a way that pleases Him and benefits others.
So taqwa goes beyond just the outward rituals, right?
It does. It's about cultivating that inner state of awareness and striving for excellence in all areas of life.
Yeah.
Being honest even when no one's watching, being kind even when it's difficult, and being just even when it goes against our own interests.
It's that alignment between our inner values and our outer actions.
Exactly.
Living a life of integrity and purpose.
And that idea is beautifully captured in Hadith 1.2, where the Prophet Muhammad, he defines the sweetness of faith.
Okay.
And he lists these three qualities.
Okay.
1, to whom Allah and His Apostle becomes dearer than anything else. 2, who loves a person and he loves them only for Allah's sake. 3, who hates to revert to atheism, disbelief, as he hates to be thrown into the fire.
Wow, those three qualities really capture the essence of taqwa.
Yeah.
Prioritizing love for Allah and His messenger above all else.
Absolutely.
Loving others for the sake of Allah,
Yeah.
and having this deep aversion to anything that contradicts faith.
It's about making Allah the central focus of your life.
Yeah.
And letting that love and devotion guide your relationships and your choices.
It's a beautiful aspiration.
It is.
But also a very challenging one.
Yeah.
That requires constant effort and self-reflection.
That's the beauty of faith. It's an ongoing journey, not a fixed destination.
Yeah.
It's about constantly striving, learning, and growing, always seeking to improve ourselves and deepen our connection with Allah.
Now, before we move on, I want to touch on another really fascinating element of Sahih Bukhari.
Okay.
Those detailed accounts of the Prophet Muhammad's physical appearance and daily habits.
Right. So these seemingly insignificant details actually paint a very vivid and intimate portrait of him.
Yeah. It's amazing how those details, often overlooked, can humanize the Prophet.
They do.
And make him more relatable, even to those outside the faith. For instance, Hadith 4.117 mentions that when the Prophet mounted his camel, he would start reciting Talbiyah at the mosque of Dhul Hulaifa.
Interesting.
It's a small detail.
Yeah.
But it gives us this glimpse into his, deep devotion.
Right.
How prayer was really integrated into even, the most ordinary activities.
And it wasn't just about, religious rituals.
Yeah.
Hadith 4.118 describes him riding an unsaddled horse with his sword slung over his shoulder.
Wow.
So it suggests a man who was both practical and prepared.
It's like a snapshot from history.
It is.
Transporting us back to that time and place.
Right. And then the descriptions of his appearance really reinforce his humility and approachability.
Yeah.
So Hadith 4.119 mentions him riding a horse belonging to Abu Talha without a saddle, indicating that he wasn't really concerned with these outward displays of wealth or status.
It reinforces that message that we were talking about earlier. True leadership isn't about material possessions. It's about character and action.
Exactly. And humility is further emphasized in Hadith 4.323.
Okay.
Where, the Prophet instructs a companion who's just returned from a journey to offer 2 rakats.
Okay.
So this simple act, it really demonstrates that even the Prophet, despite his, elevated status, was still bound by the same religious obligations as any other Muslim.
It's a powerful reminder that in the eyes of Allah, we are all equal, regardless of our, position or accomplishments in this world.
And all these seemingly insignificant details about the Prophet's life, his habits, his appearance, his interactions with others, they really contribute to a richer and more nuanced understanding of, the man who founded Islam.
They paint this picture of a leader who is both profoundly spiritual
Yes.
and deeply human.
Yeah. A man of action and compassion who continues to inspire millions around the world.
It's those personal touches
Right.
that really bring the historical figure to life.
Yeah.
And allow us to connect with him on a more human level.
It's like we're getting a glimpse behind the curtain, right? Seeing the prophet not just as, this religious figurehead,
Right.
but as a husband, a friend, a traveler, a man of his time.
Right.
And it's those little details that I think make his story so compelling.
Absolutely. And speaking of compelling stories, Sahih Bukhari is full of anecdotes that really shed light on the Prophet's teachings, his interactions with his companions, and the social dynamics of early Islam.
Like that story about the young boy who refused to give up the rest of his drink to the Prophet's companions.
Oh, yes. I love that story.
It's in Hadith 3.541, and he insisted that no one, not even the Prophet, would get preferential treatment when it came to his drink.
It's such a delightful story, and it highlights the respect
given to even the youngest members of the community.
Yes.
And it also hints at, the Prophet's gentle humor in accepting, the boy's assertive response.
I love those little moments,
Me too.
They really show, the human side
They do.
of these revered figures.
Yes, absolutely.
And Sahih Bukhari doesn't shy away from more, difficult topics either, like the issue of slavery.
That's true. Slavery was, a widespread practice in the 7th century. And while Islam sought to, improve the conditions of slaves and encourage their emancipation, it didn't completely abolish the institution.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
And that complexity is really reflected in the hadiths. Like, for example, Hadith 3.720 states that he who has a slave girl and educates and treats her nicely and then manumits and marries her will get a double reward.
So this hadith, while acknowledging the existence of slavery, it encourages ethical treatment.
Right.
And ultimately the freeing of slaves.
Right.
It even suggests, a path to social mobility through marriage, even for those who were once enslaved.
Yeah, it's a glimpse into, the social realities of the time.
Yeah.
And the steps that were being taken, towards a more just and equitable society.
Speaking of justice, there are some really thought-provoking hadiths about, economic fairness and the importance of upholding contracts.
Right.
So Islamic teachings really place a strong emphasis on honesty in business dealings and fulfilling one's obligations.
Right.
So, for example, Hadith 3.364 states that if somebody concludes a contract and the contract contains some conditions which are not in Allah's laws, then that condition is invalid even if he imposes 100 conditions. For Allah's conditions are more binding and reliable.
So basically, no matter what you write in a contract, it can't violate Islamic principles.
That's right.
Divine law trumps human agreements.
Divine law trumps human agreements.
It's a bold statement.
It is.
About the importance of ethical considerations in all aspects of life.
It is, including, business and finance.
Yeah, it's like saying that even in the marketplace, there's this higher authority that we're accountable to.
Absolutely.
And then there's this interesting hadith about renting farmland.
Okay.
In Hadith 3.535, we learn that Ibn Umar, who was a close companion of the Prophet, he used to rent out his farms until he heard a hadith that the Prophet had forbidden the practice.
Wow.
So it shows that even someone as close to the Prophet as Ibn Umar was constantly learning and adapting his understanding. Yeah, it's like peeling back those layers in a perfectly crafted pastry.
Oh, what a delicious analogy. It really speaks to the beauty of exploration, diving deep into something unfamiliar and coming away with like a whole new perspective.
Absolutely.
But, it's not always easy to reconcile these, ancient teachings with our modern understanding of the world. Take, for example, like women's roles in society.
Yeah.
The texts that we've been discussing, they were written in a very different time with very different social norms and gender dynamics.
Right.
So how do you think those teachings are being, interpreted and applied by Muslim women today?
That's a really great question, and it's one that I think probably has as many answers as there are Muslim women in the world.
I bet.
I think it would be fascinating to hear from, different voices within the Muslim community to understand how they navigate, those tensions between tradition and modernity, between the roles that are prescribed by these ancient texts and the realities of their lived experiences.
I completely agree, and I think it's a conversation that's happening within, many faith traditions, not just Islam.
Right.
How do we honor and learn from our sacred text?
Yeah.
While also acknowledging the ways in which our understanding of the world has evolved.
Right.
It's a complex and challenging question.
It is.
But I think it's one that's essential to engage with.
Right.
If we want to build bridges of understanding.
Yeah.
Across different cultures and perspectives.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about these deep dives,
Me too.
We're not just gathering information.
Right.
We're grappling with big questions. We're challenging our assumptions.
Yeah.
We're expanding our understanding of the world.
It's about that intellectual and spiritual journey.
Yeah.
The process of discovery and growth.
I like that.
And, speaking of growth.
Yeah.
One of the things that really struck me as we were going through these texts is the emphasis on continuous learning.
Mm-hmm.
On seeking knowledge as a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing facts,
Yeah.
It's about developing a deeper understanding of yourself, of your faith, and the world around you.
It's almost like knowledge is seen as a form of worship in itself.
I think you're right.
A way to connect with the divine.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that, our education shouldn't stop once we leave school.
Right.
Or finish a particular course.
Right.
Right. True learning is a lifelong endeavor.
Yes.
And it should encompass all aspects of our lives. The spiritual, the intellectual, the emotional, the practical.
It's about that holistic approach.
Yes, exactly.
To growth and development.
And I think that's a really powerful takeaway from our deep dive into these Islamic texts, right? They're not just about following rules or performing rituals. They're about cultivating, a way of being in the world. A way of life that's grounded in faith, compassion, justice, and a commitment to lifelong learning.
It's inspiring. It really is. And I think it speaks to something that's universal.
Yes.
Something that transcends any particular religion or belief system.
Right.
It's that yearning to live a meaningful life.
Yeah.
To connect with something larger than ourselves, to make a positive impact on the world.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the Quran and Sahih Bukhari, I'm left with a sense of gratitude, for the opportunity to explore these texts and to share this journey of discovery with you, our listeners.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has, sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and maybe even inspired you to embark on your own exploration of Islamic teachings and practices.
Remember, the journey of learning, it's never ending.
Yeah.
It's a path that's, filled with challenges, surprises, and ultimately incredible rewards.
Right.
So keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and keep diving deep.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brain cells firing.
Happy diving.